Have you ever wondered why survival horror feels so genuinely terrifying? It's not just the jump scares or the atmosphere. It's the sinking realization of biological inferiority. The thing hunting you is clearer, faster, and stronger than human physiology allows. Today, we aren't just ranking these monsters by how scary they look. We are ranking them by biological efficiency, infection rates, and kinetic potential. We're applying real-world biomechanics and virology to 10 iconic monsters to see which ones would actually end humanity, and which are just biological failures of evolution. Let's start with the one that might be nature's perfect mistake. First up is the Xenomorph from Alien Isolation. This creature is often called the perfect organism, and biologically, that's hard to argue against. Let's look at the defense mechanism first. Pressurized acid blood. For a biological fluid to melt through whole plating, it would need a pH level below 0, effectively functioning like fluoroantimonic acid. The creature's own veins would need a Teflon-like lining or a constant mucus buffer just to keep from dissolving itself from the inside out. Then you have the exoskeleton. It's likely silicone-based rather than carbon-based, providing a composite density that explains why small arms fire bounces right off its carapace. But the real terror is the pharyngeal jaw, that little mouth inside the big mouth. This isn't just for show. It acts like a hydraulic piston. A human bite relies on leverage from the jaw hinge, but the Xenomorph's inner jaw shoots forward with kinetic energy independent of the neck muscles. It punches through skull density without the creature needing to leverage its own body weight. And sensory input? It has no eyes. It tracks you via pheromones and changes in air density. You can't hide from something that sees the displacement of air when you breathe. In a real ecosystem, this thing doesn't just survive, it dominates. Tier ranking, Tier S. It is the apex predator. Biological flaws are non-existent. Now let's switch from a perfect organism to one that is barely holding itself together. If you look at the Grunt, or the Gatherer from Amnesia, The Dark Descent, you're seeing a biological mess. This isn't an evolved predator, it's a stitched-together disaster. Notice the anatomy. The skin is stretched so tight over the muscle that it's likely tearing with every step. The muscle fibers are exposed to the open air, which means zero protection against infection. In a real-world scenario, this creature is in constant agonizing pain, and its range of motion would be severely limited by scar tissue and lack of skin elasticity. It's Frankenstein's monster without the intelligence. The sutures holding the skin together are stress points waiting to inevitably fail. The most iconic feature is that drooping, unhinged jaw. While it looks terrifying, it's mechanically and structurally useless. A jaw needs a fulcrum to generate bite force. By having the mandible completely dislocated and hanging by loose flesh, the Gatherer loses all ability to bite, chew, or even swallow efficiently. It can't process fuel. It relies entirely on blunt force trauma with its hands, but even then, the lack of antagonistic muscle pairing suggests it would be slow and clumsy. It's a psychological weapon, not a biological one. The exposed tissue means it would likely die of sepsis or necrosis within days of being created. Tier ranking, Tier D. In a real ecosystem, bacteria would kill them before they kill you. Resident Evil 4 introduced the Regenerator, and this thing is a nightmare of metabolic efficiency. The core mechanic here is the Plaga parasites living inside the host. Think of these not just as weak points, but as auxiliary hearts. In human biology, if you destroy the heart, blood pressure drops and the brain dies. Here, the circulation is decentralized. You can blow a hole in its chest and the remaining parasites will simply reroute blood flow to keep the limbs moving. Bleeding out is biologically impossible for this thing. Then there's the movement. Have you noticed that twitchy, shivering walk? That's likely a side effect of hyperactive metabolism generating massive amounts of heat. Rapid cellular mitosis, regeneration, requires insane amounts of energy. That shivering is the body trying to burn off the excess thermal energy so it doesn't cook itself. This heat generation explains why you need a thermal scope to see the parasites. They are the heat source fueling this biological engine. And look at the reach. These things can extend their arms to grab you from across the room. For a limb to stretch like that without snapping, the collagen density in its connective tissue would need to be comparable to industrial rubber. It defies the limits of human tensile strength entirely. Tier ranking, Tier A. Only thermal destruction stops the cellular division. Speaking of things that react violently to their environment. When you hear the witch crying in Left 4 Dead, you aren't hearing sadness. You are hearing a biological hibernation state designed to conserve glucose. This creature is a masterclass in extreme metabolic efficiency and acute adrenal response. In a dormant state, Her heart rate drops and her body temperature lowers, allowing her to survive without food for extended periods. But the moment you trigger the startle mechanic, whether by light, sound, or proximity, her system doesn't just wake up. It floods with a lethal cocktail of cortisol and epinephrine. This is a sympathetic storm on a level that would cause cardiac arrest in a normal human. But for her, it's the fuel for instant explosive violence. What's scientifically fascinating is the disparity between her skeletal structure and her kinetic output. She appears emaciated, with visible ribs and sunken features, yet she incapacitates a healthy human survivor instantly. This implies a muscle fiber density similar to a chimpanzee. Chimps possess higher ratios of fast-twitch muscle fibers compared to humans, making them roughly 4 times stronger pound for pound. The witch operates on this principle. Her muscles are denser, more efficient, and recruited instantly by the adrenal dump. However, this comes at a cost. She has 0 dermal armor and no protective mutations. She is a biological glass cannon, capable of delivering massive trauma, but unable to sustain it. Tier ranking, Tier B. She is deadly one-on-one, but physically fragile against ballistics. Resident Evil 3 gave us the Nemesis T-type, and unlike the other monsters on this list, he isn't a random mutation, he is a precision-engineered weapon. The core of his biology is the Ni-alpha parasite. You have to understand that the tyrant host body is basically a mound of uncontrolled muscle growth. The parasite acts as a second brain, bypassing the host's natural damage limiters and taking direct control of the motor functions. This allows for complex problem solving like using rocket launchers or tracking specific targets, which is impossible for standard infected organisms that operate on instinct alone. The most overlooked scientific detail is his signature leather coat. It's not a fashion choice, it's a compression suit acting as a power limiter. The T-virus causes muscle tissues to regenerate and expand so rapidly that without this containment suit, the Nemesis's own musculature would likely tear his skeleton apart or expand into a non-functional mass. The suit keeps the biological pressure contained, focusing that kinetic energy outward rather than inward. When you damage the suit, you see the mutation run wild because the containment is breached. He combines the durability of a tank with the regenerative properties of a starfish and the cognitive function of a soldier. In terms of bioweaponry, he is the gold standard. Tier ranking, Tier S. He is biology weaponized to its absolute limit. The Clicker from The Last of Us is the most scientifically grounded zombie variant we've seen, based on real-world Ophiocordyceps fungi. The terrifying fungal plates exploding out of the face aren't just for show. They are calcified fungal matter that acts as improvised facial armor. This makes the headshot rule much harder to apply because you're trying to penetrate dense, fibrous material before hitting the brainstem. However, this armor comes with a catastrophic evolutionary trade-off: total blindness. The fungus has completely overgrown the optical orbits, forcing the host to rely entirely on echolocation. Here is where the biology fails. Echolocation works incredibly well in water because water is dense and transmits sound waves efficiently. In air, sound dissipates rapidly. For a clicker to navigate a room, it has to constantly emit that clicking sound to create a low-resolution sound map of its surroundings. This is why their movement is so erratic and jerky. They are constantly trying to triangulate their position in a world they can't see. While the infection is terrifyingly realistic, the host is biologically compromised. A predator that broadcasts its position constantly and cannot see a threat standing 3 feet away is easily outmaneuvered in open spaces. Tier ranking, Tier C. In Outlast, the Walrider is initially presented as a ghost, but the science reveals something far deadlier: a nanotech swarm. This entity is a cloud of billions of microscopic nanites controlled by a morphogenic engine. Physics doesn't apply to it in the traditional sense, but it isn't a simple organism. It's a collective intelligence. When you try to shoot or hit the Walrider, you are effectively trying to punch a cloud of smoke. The kinetic energy of a bullet simply passes through the gaps between the nanites, making traditional weaponry completely obsolete. You cannot kill what effectively has no solid mass to destroy. The lethality comes from how it interacts with human biology. It doesn't need to bite you. It passes through the soft tissue of the biology, attacking on a cellular level. It can enter the lungs, the bloodstream, or the brain, physically disassembling tissues from the inside or causing massive internal hemorrhaging just by passing through you. It represents the ultimate apex of the list because it transcends biological mortality entirely. It doesn't need to breathe, it doesn't bleed, and it can move through ventilation shafts or solid matter by disassembling and reassembling itself. In a survival scenario, there is no fighting this. You simply die. Tier ranking, Tier S. It transcends biological mortality entirely. Let's pivot back to flesh and blood, specifically flesh that burns in the sunlight. The Volatile from Dying Light represents a rabies-like virus pushed to its absolute biological extreme. The Harran virus rewrites the host's entire musculoskeletal system. The most striking feature is the split mandible. This isn't just for intimidation, it allows for the maximum intake of biomass in the shortest amount of time. These creatures are high-performance sprinters, and that level of kinetic output requires a caloric intake that a normal human mouth simply cannot provide. They need to gorge themselves to fuel that pursuit speed. However, their biological supremacy comes with a catastrophic flaw: extreme photosensitivity. Their tissue completely lacks melanin or the protective enzymes required to filter ultraviolet radiation. When exposed to UV light, their cells don't just burn, they undergo rapid apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. The radiation literally unravels their DNA sequence in real time. This makes them a Tier B threat. They are absolute apex predators during the night cycle, terrifyingly fast and strong, but they are biologically incompetent during the day. This circadian dependency is a massive evolutionary disadvantage. In a real ecosystem, a predator that must hide for 12 hours a day is vulnerable to displacement or starvation. They are powerful, but they are restricted by the rotation of the Earth itself. Moving from a stable mutation to unstable chaos, we have William Birkin and the G-Virus from Resident Evil 2. If the T-Virus is a weapon, the G-Virus is an evolutionary cancer. It forces rapid, aggressive evolution, but it lacks a biological stop button. The host's body grows new limbs, eyes, and bone plating randomly in a desperate, chaotic attempt to survive trauma. Birkin grows a massive clawed arm on one side, while the other side remains relatively human. This creates a nightmare for his center of gravity. To stay upright, his spinal column has to twist and reinforce itself constantly, likely causing excruciating nerve pain and inefficient locomotion. The virus is consuming the host's caloric reserves to build biomass that is functionally necessary. He has growing eyes on his shoulders that don't seem to have optic nerves connecting to his central brain. It represents an evolutionary dead end because the organism is prioritizing infinite growth over functional stability. Infinite regeneration is useless if the organism mutates into a non-functional blob of biomass that can't walk or hunt effectively. He is a Tier A threat because of his sheer durability, but biologically, he is a train wreck waiting to collapse. Finally, we arrive at the most efficient conversion engine in horror history, the Necromorph from Dead Space. This is the gold standard of biological lethality. Most monsters on this list still rely on functioning organs. The Necromorph slasher renders those concepts obsolete. The infection repurposes existing bone and muscle into pure killing tools. It takes the calcium from the host skeleton and sharpens it into external blades, while the muscles are rewoven into high-tension springs for explosive movement. This is why the headshot rule fails. There is no brain to destroy, no central nervous system to shut down. The infection exists in every cell, driven by the marker signal. The only way to stop them is mechanical dismemberment, literally cutting the levers that allow them to move. But the true genius of this organism is the recombination engine. A dead necromorph isn't waste. It is raw material. The infection can break down the biomass of a fallen slasher and reform it into a new shape, or merge it with others to form larger threats. It is the ultimate contagion because it doesn't just kill the host, it instantly recycles the material into a weapon. This earns it a solid Tier S ranking. It is the perfect biological recycling machine. When you analyze the data, the pattern becomes clear. The deadliest monsters in survival horror aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest claws or the loudest roars. They are the ones that defy the laws of thermodynamics and biology to outlast us. They are the ones that turn our own physiology against us. If you want to see us break down the physics of how Kratos survives these kinds of threats, watch this next video. Subscribe for more science breakdowns.